BTO is the cornerstone that helps to ensure housing for many Singaporeans. Over the decades, the government's public housing framework has done an impressive job keeping homes accessible, affordable, and communities well integrated. But at the same time, nothing is perfect, right? There's always room for improvement. So in this video, I'm going to discuss what are the downsides of the current BTO process. And so I don't sound like a petty Karen, I will also discuss what are the suggestions that might be able to improve the process. The first downside would be the two-room Flexi quota allocation. So expanding the two-room Flexi eligibility for singles across all launch locations has been a huge and welcome step forward. Objectively, actually, nowadays, there are more two-room Flexi being launched versus several years ago. However, the underlying quota rules create very different application dynamics depending on the size of the project. Under the current guidelines, the senior priority scheme sets aside at least 40% of two-room Flexi flats and subjected to a minimum of 100 units per project for senior. But interestingly, there is no maximum cap of how many two-room Flexi can go to seniors. Depending on how many total two-room Flexi units in a development, this rule actually leads to drastically different outcomes for single applicants. For example, if a project has a lot of two-room Flexi units, let's use an example so that it's easier to understand. Let's take Berlaya Rise. This project was launched back in June and it provided 816 two-room Flexi units. On paper, that sounds a lot, right? But remember, 40% is allocated to seniors and then there's no maximum cap. So when I did my calculation, that is roughly 326 two-room Flexi allocated to seniors, and then the balance still need to be shared among first-timer and second-timer families and also singles, right? So if I calculate the numbers, singles allocation is 318. But this is actually still okay lah, because if the supply pool was large, single applicants still have a relatively fair allocation. But it is a completely different story if you look at the small projects. Let's take Woodgrove Acres for example. This was also launched back in June. The project provided only 157 two-room Flexi units. Because of the minimum 100 unit rule for seniors, then out of the 157, 100 flats are allocated to seniors directly. And again, because the balance needs to be split between first-timer family, second-timer family, and also singles, that left only about 37 units for singles. And as we can see in the BTO application rate results itself, the single application rate for Woodlands at that time is a massive 17.5. This is facts, huh? You can look at it yourself. That is the reality. When a fixed minimum cap is applied to a small project base, it is unintentionally squeezes out single applicants and pushes competition through the roof. On the other hand, because there's no maximum cap for seniors, even though a project provided a lot of two-room Flexi, it remains challenging for singles to secure a flat. So what are the potential solutions? My suggestion would be to have proportional allocation for small projects. For projects offering fewer than 200 two-room Flexi units, why not replace the absolute 100 unit minimum with a flexible percentage floor? For example, just keep it 40%. This would keep the unit distribution more fair across different demographics. And then another potential solution would be setting a maximum threshold for two-room Flexi allocated to seniors. So as mentioned, right now, they only have minimum cap, but they don't have maximum cap. Why not just cap it? For example, let's say limited to 250 units or something. This would ensure that the senior quotas do not overwhelm the allocation for singles. Now, I know that some of you is probably not happy that I suggest a maximum cap for seniors, but then again, if we look at it from a broader perspective, nowadays, seniors already gotten an upper hand because above 55 years old, nowadays can apply for CCA ma, singles cannot. So that is actually additional help for seniors already. I'm just trying to say that we need to ensure that all different groups in Singapore gets some help in terms of securing flats lah. That's what I'm trying to say. The next potential opportunity is the long wait times and the dilemma for couples. Because getting a queue number often takes multiple attempts and the end-to-end BTO journey spans several years, life happens, During this extended waiting time, some couples naturally broken up. They are no longer compatible and decide to go their separate ways. But under the current rule, breaking up before key collection results in forfeiting down payments or paying financial penalties and losing first-timer priority status for a period. But even if you already collected the keys, some couple still try to just bite the bullet while waiting for the MOP. While intended to prevent systemic abuse, it places a heavy financial and administrative burden on individuals navigating a genuine emotional breakup. My suggestion is actually for the government to introduce a structured partner name transfer framework and to prevent this accommodation from being misused as a loophole to sell BTO queue numbers. This could be paired with strict safeguards. For example, why not implement strict one-time exemption? Let's say a buyer is granted a name swap allowance only once per lifetime. This way, people would be more careful as well before entering this framework. And then another thing that can be implemented would be the outgoing partner need to sign release. So the departing partner must sign a notarized declaration confirming they forfeit all rights to the queue number voluntarily. Logically, I think it still makes sense. If, let's say, the incoming party, refunds some actual CPF or cash deposit paid into the HDB account of the outgoing party, but I think the number should be strict on that. There shouldn't be any additional financial compensation to ensure that this framework is not being misused as a loophole. The next potential opportunity is resale market benchmarking. So to determine BTO pricing, usually HDB applies a market discount to comparable nearby resale flat transactions. While this ensures new flats are sold below market value, it creates a subtle pricing feedback loop. As surrounding resale HDB prices rise, the baseline benchmark for new BTO flats ended up rising along with them. Even with structural measures such as extra subsidies and also subsidy recovery percentage introduced under the Plus and Prime housing framework, the raw entry prices for choice or central BTO locations remain significantly higher than those in outer regions. For young families with modest incomes, this valuation mechanism means choice locations can still feel financially steep upfront, even with government discounts applied. So what are the potential solutions? Well, why not consider construction cost plus model for baseline pricing? HDB could explore pricing BTOs based on construction costs plus land development costs rather than anchoring heavily to surrounding resale HDB transaction values. And then another possibility would be tiered initial grants for choice locations. Why not expanding income-weighted grants specifically tailored for central BTO launches to ensure lower to middle income buyers are not priced out of prime locations before accounting for future clawbacks? The next potential opportunity is the environmental and biodiversity trade-offs. To meet pressing public housing demand in mature and non-mature estates, new BTO developments sometimes require clearing forested areas or secondary vegetation. There are some notable examples in the past. For example, the Tengah Forest Town, where they had to clear large tracts of secondary forest to build thousands of new BTO units. Another example is in Dover Forest or Ulu Pandan. The initial plans to develop the entire 33-hectare secondary forest lead to public dialogue, eventually resulting in a compromise where only the eastern portion was allocated for public housing, while the western portion was set aside as a nature park. While providing homes is a vital national priority, felling urban forests raises valid ecological concern regarding biodiversity loss, wildlife displacement, and local urban heat island effect. So, potential solution might include prioritizing brownfields and industrial sites, accelerating the development of underutilized industrial land, vacant school plots, or brownfield sites before tapping into forested greenery. Another thing that could be considered is eco-connectivity mandates. This is basically expanding initiatives like wildlife corridors, mandatory green plot ratios, and hybrid designs that integrate public housing adjacent to preserved green zones, similar to the revised Ulu Pandan framework. The next potential opportunity is temporary housing overhead during extended waits. For young couples who choose not to live with parents while waiting for their BTO, rental expenses present a significant financial drag. While the Parenthood Provisional Housing Scheme provides subsidized rental flats, the supply realistically is still limited. This leaves many couples paying market rents that erode the savings intended for flat renovation and mortgage servicing. One potential solution would be to expand the rental vouchers. By expanding the rental support vouchers for first-timer couples waiting for their BTO flats, this would allow them to offset private open market rentals if PPHS units are not available. But what do you think? Is there any other downside to the current BTO process that I haven't discussed yet? Let me know in the comment section down below what are those, and don't forget to also include what are your suggestions to improve the situation. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye. To support my work, you can give a one-time tip by pressing the thanks button, pick the amount that you want, and click buy and send. Or you can also press the join button for exclusive contents and monthly membership. Your support means a lot to keep us independent. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye.